have too much to say other than it's good to see everybody again. And obviously we're still kind of going through some official sides of how this is going to shake out. Carol, I see you're in here. Did you want to add anything to start us off?
I just wanted to mention that I'm doing this by phone, and can you hear me? I guess is the first question.
We can.
All right, I can hear you. As I'm sitting here looking at the rotunda in front of the Muni, I'm all in favor of keeping this by Zoom. So let's carry on that platform with whoever can make it tonight.
All right. Well, I guess we can hold off, I suppose, on the minutes, right? Since we don't have an official thing. Okay. So then we've got our draft letter to our residents on the problem areas. Is that, Joe, you want to fill us in a little bit on that?
Yes, Mr. Farmer. Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and members of the task force, as you know.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you drop down to 5A? Is that where you're at on the agenda?
I guess we do need to do public comment.
We need to do public comment. That's what I was going to point out. We skipped over that.
Okay, I didn't see anybody in there, but if anybody would like to make a public comment, we can do that now. No? Okay. All right, back to 5A then. Let's do it.
Well, thank you. Co-chairs and members of the task force, as you know, one of the first actions of this group was to engage property owners that live near the system of creeks, streams, tributaries, floodplain areas, etc. Much to, I think, the task force's surprise, we received a good number of responses. Our list grew from 2 that the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District had to over 80. As part of that, we made a commitment to those property owners to get back to them and let them know what we were doing as a task force and what we might be able to do to assist them. That follow-up never really materialized to the degree we wanted. There has been individual follow-up over the course of time, but not to the degree I think the task force expected. And so at the beginning of this year, it kind of laid out a plan for how to re-engage those property owners and let them know what the task force has accomplished and how we'd like to proceed forward in the future. So tonight, the department prepared a draft letter for the consideration of the task force members. Ms. Holthouse has provided some comments via email that I think are very germane. And I received those late this afternoon, so you do not have them as task force members, but will. But tonight, I'd just like to hear your comments. If there's anything you'd like to delete, add, change, there's no pride of authorship here. We just want to get a good letter out to the property owners, and that's the intent tonight. Mr. Farmer, Ms. Holthouse, I am completed my task on this, so I'm here for questions as well as Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cross, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Rowan. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or concerns on the letter?
The thoughts I had were that kind of a constructive way we could explain the delay getting back to them is just that, yeah, we've been busy doing things, but also these are dynamic systems, and we wanted to touch back with people and see if conditions had changed, and maybe emphasize that people may want to contact. I appreciated Joe's offer to go out and meet with 80 different property owners, but I think if we could kind of emphasize if conditions have changed or that things are really severe, would be happy to come out for a site visit. But, I'd hate to put that long list of visits on their, to-do list without some suggestion of why, they might want somebody to come out there. The other thing I think it would be good to add would be either some link or some reference to the fact that we did, we heard them, we took all of their input along with what the consultants had said, and that there was a very objective way of evaluating what were our top priorities. So I think, something that just explains, hey, this wasn't an arbitrary throw darts at a map or, you know, what ward they were in or whatever, that it was, you know, based on some very objective criteria with, you know, expert input. So,
Yeah, I think that's all great feedback. I think I also would say, I think I saw some of your notes, Carol. I mean, I think just generally speaking, you know, streamlining the letters just a little bit so that people don't accidentally glaze over what they're looking at and not realize what it is always a good idea. But yeah, I thought your notes were good, Carol.
right.
Anybody else? All right, so Joe, I mean, can't really, I guess, do anything officially, but you know, we'll just keep kind of polishing that up a little bit. And do we have an idea on when we would like to get it out? Is it kind of a just as soon as possible thing, or do we have a firm date set?
Well, given that we don't have a quorum tonight, what I would like to do and what I've offered to Ms. Holthouse is I've sent her the Word version of the document to kind of refine it based upon her comments. What I would suggest is I send out to the task force member her comments, and then obviously once edits have been made to the draft letter, then send that out to the task force as well. If there's no objection, then yes, we would try to implement it as soon as possible.
Yeah, that works for me. Anybody think otherwise? All right, cool. Then we also got the letter to the trustees on the various basins that we're looking at.
And again, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair and members of the task force, obviously one of the key components of our efforts as a group to do something now and not wait, let's say, for the big projects was to look at the retention detention basins and portions of the Caulk Creek watershed that would have the greatest impact in terms of improving storage of stormwater. That analysis was not done by the Department of Planning, but it was done by Joe Wilson of Wilson Hydro and Todd Wagner of Wagner and Associates, and to a large degree, I think, our Department of Public Works. And so from that perspective, the 6 basins were identified. Those 6 basins exist in residential subdivisions. They are all located in common ground. And so for our analysis to proceed forward to see, even if they can work for us, we need to get the cooperation of the homeowners association. So a draft letter was prepared that would be sent to the trustees. And again, as with the other, there is no pride in authorship. If there's a better way to do it, if there's something missing, something needed to be removed, certainly I'd love to hear your comments, and then we can prepare that as well. Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on those letters?
Yeah, on the last paragraph
Yep.
in the letter, I think it's just a grammatical issue. If you have any questions regarding this matter or to make requested contact for the meeting, comma, please contact the department. That first sentence isn't a sentence.
Thank you, Mr. Patton. It is. It's probably just an poor typist by the director of planning. So thank you.
Joe, I will mention we had our little trustee meeting for Westland Farms. We've got one of the big ones, and we don't need the letter. You guys are fine to do whatever we need to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important in here. I mean, that was the question, not really a question. That was a concern the other 2 trustees from my subdivision had, which is just, you know, if we let the city come take a look at things and there's something wrong, who's paying to do these upgrades and everything else? And I said, well, said very well here in the letter, like the city's going to make these upgrades if that's what's necessary. And then probably depending on the scope of that, you know, in most cases, the subdivision will be responsible for just the general maintenance, which shouldn't be much more than what is currently going on. And in some cases, the city might chip in on that if it's extensive. Does that sound pretty fair?
I believe that's the direction the task force kind of established. And the reason I always use the analogy when I talk to homeowners associations, in that if we don't maintain these improvements, ultimately those problems go downstream, and downstream is a lot of roads and bridges and public spaces and private property. So there is a benefit to the city participating in maintenance, particularly if we do substantial improvements. So as we know that the money we spent will do what we wanted to in terms of achievements.
Cool. All right. Well, you got one subdivision you can check off the list. We're good to go from West Glen Farms. A couple more to go, I guess.
That's a great day. One off the list and 5 to go.
There you
And
go.
just so the task force is aware, I did have a conversation with one of the trustees in Windcrest. It was on another matter, but I took the opportunity to explain to her that we would like to visit the subdivision with our 2 consultants and see if we can actually do something to improve the circumstances. And her initial impression was very positive. So Ms. Eden's Ward 2 seems to be on board as well. So we'll follow up with them though.
I'll let them into line if they're not. So.
All right, thanks.
All right. Unless anybody has anything else to add on those, we can move on to the USGS study update of Cox Creek.
Again, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and members of the task force, Dan Ron has been kind of the point person with Dr. Leroy and her team from the United States Geological Survey. Dan and I have been receiving what I would say are regular updates when they meet milestones, so to speak. And so what Dan and I prepared is a very simple update. We provided Dr. Leroy's last email relative to an update and some of the images that are coming out of the LiDAR analysis that's being completed in certain segments of Cox Creek. I'm going to ask Dan if he has anything he'd like to add at this time. Thank you.
Not a lot to add. Good evening, everybody. I believe that they are going to start next week or the following week. They're going to be back to finish up some of the collections that they're doing. But not a lot to add here, but they are moving along well and getting a lot of data. So it's going well so far. Thank you.
Great.
And with the co-chair's permission, just a couple of other items. I did call Ms. Leroy today, Dr. Leroy, just to kind of ask a couple of quick questions. The first was, are they on schedule? And yes, they are on schedule and they're pleased with the progress they've made. Secondly, how are they holding up with the heat? And she said one of their safety directors from the federal agency came and talked to them about that. So buyer beware, it's hot in the creek if you're out there. And then thirdly, any initial impressions? And she said, no, not at this stage, but they'll be formulating those shortly and we'll be glad to kind of let the task force know where they're headed. So a lot more to follow, but they are on schedule.
Great. Let's go. Good news. All right. I guess next up, we've got the grant applications. I assume, Rick, is that you or you? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Delancey, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just basically because I may just not be aware, but could you give me a brief connection between what those folks are doing and what the hydrologists, just make that connection for me between what those and how those entities will come together. I'm unclear on that.
Sure. Joe, you want to take it away?
I'd maybe ask Dan to do that, Mr. Ron.
Sure.
Yes. So basically, what the USGS is doing a series of data collection in the stream. They did some LiDAR, which they're shooting like a 3D image of the creek. They're going to measure velocities in the creek, water levels, and they will tie all of those elements together and develop a model for where the highest velocities are, where they think the highest erosion potential is. And so then we can use that as kind of a predictive model for the future of where we might need better stream bank stabilization and armoring and things like that. And on top of that, to tie maybe the projects together, we can take this data and then our when we say, okay, we're going to pick, which we'll talk about real soon, I guess. But when we select a certain site, then they can use that data to fine tune their design and, to figure out exactly what needs to be done at each site. So that's kind of, I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, I just needed to know the connection because of, the Joe Wilson thing and the USGS. I just wondered how that's going to merge together and in what way. Thank you.
Yeah.
And am I correct that also the USGS survey developed a model where you can play out some sort of what if scenarios?
Yeah.
Tension
Yeah, you're
basing capacity, we can really see, how that is going to impact downstream individual projects. Can't really. Am I correct in that kind of linkage?
Yes, I believe if I can answer, I think I caught most of what you said there, I think, but I think the question was how if we can use that as like a predictive model for some of the projects that we're looking at. And is that right, Ms. Holthouse?
Yes, in particular the detention basins and their capacity, changes.
Yes, they can tie all that data together when we look at those detention basin retrofits, if you want to call it that. They can tie that data together to help us decide where the best return is, so to speak.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I think also as part of the study, the USGS is also going to identify potential areas for future additional storage based upon what Dan's described as the flow characteristics, the water levels, et cetera. So we'll get something from them as well beyond just what we're doing.
awesome. All right. Anybody have any other questions or concerns on the USGS stuff? All right. The grant applications, is that you, Rick, or Joe? Are you still going on that?
Sorry.
It is a combination of Mr. Brown and Mr. Rowe. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I think Dan was prepared to talk to this. Quite frankly, I'm going to let him
Cool.
go.
Let's hear it,
forward and
Dan.
give you an update, and then I'll fill in any holes that need to be.
Yes, thank you again. I feel like I get the microphone an awful lot tonight. Yeah, so you saw Mr. Vinish's report, but just to kind of recap that a little bit, we have there's a grant, an ARPA grant that totals about $400 million, and that is going directly toward infrastructure improvements for stormwater, wastewater, and potable water. And $150 million of that grant program is carved out specifically for stormwater projects. So we went from $0 anywhere in the state to 150 million. So we'll see how that goes with the applications and how many projects get sent in, but that's kind of the program in a nutshell. We submitted 5 projects. We submitted the Triple Meander and Elegant Child Detention Basin fix. That's as one project. The Evergreen Forest Stream Bank Stabilization as a project. The Highlands at, is that Highlands at Chesterfield Stream Bank Stabilization or Highlands at Wild Horse?
It's inside of Wild Horse subdivision. So
Okay.
yeah, and it's a little confusing because as you drive to get to the Highlands, the only way to get through it is to drive through the first part of Wild Horse, which is actually City of Chesterfield, but then it becomes Wildwood, and then it becomes the Highlands. Sorry.
Okay. So that project was our third. The Wildwood Meadows Stream Bank Stabilization was our fourth, and then the Community Park Stream Bank Stabilization was the fifth. So we submitted a grant application for all 5 of those projects, totaling $6.1 million. With a $1.2 million city match and a $4.9 million grant fund. So that program, so the scoring for that is geared, or the program is geared toward low to moderate income communities and smaller populations. Was I think the the majority intent of the program. However, I think we're going to get a lot of projects submitted similar to ours in a more urban areas, because that's where our stormwater problems really lie. So we'll see how that plays out. But they will score all the projects, and they're going to publish all of the scores, which will be interesting because that doesn't happen all the time either. So they'll do that. And then the announcement should come in October. That's the schedule right now. And then we have our projects loosely scheduled for the first 2 projects, I believe, were for a 2025 construction, and the other 3 projects scheduled for like a 2026 construction. And all the money has to be spent by 2026, by December 31st, 2026. So we won't have a problem doing that, I don't think, with this group. Yeah, then I guess next steps on that will be when we find out in October if and what projects that we get awarded, we will then go out with an RFQ for those individual projects, or we'll figure out how we want to do that when we get to that point, if we want to package those up or whatever. But we'll go out for an engineering RFQ, and then we'll get started on design and final, taking our conceptual level design and costs down to a much more detailed costs and a set of construction plans. So I wanted to just say thanks to everybody. It was a very quick grant turnaround. These things popped up very quickly. So I just want to thank everybody on the city staff and all of you for quickly passing our resolutions and getting everything signed and getting everything to me to be able to turn in. So that's all I have.
Awesome. Lauren.
Well, thank you. You're the one that did all the hard work. But I would also just say if when we get that back, and let's say by some miracle we get most of what we wanted, but maybe we wouldn't get the triple meander, and we know that that's one, the land that we own that we have to maintain, and 2, the biggest bang for the buck, because I know doing that first would certainly help downstream in the highlands. I would just like to float out the thought that I would think that there would be support on council, just from talking to my fellow members, to dig in to even if we had to pull out of reserves for something like that. I think most of us see that as a necessity and more of something that we're trying to prevent an emergency on. So if we had to coordinate doing our own piece of the pie first and then working in the extra funding or extra projects, I just think it's possible. So no matter what the results are, I think that there's a lot of support, and nobody give up hope. Okay, so hang in there.
Yeah. Mr. Berger.
Yeah, I just also wanted to echo kudos for the quick action there. Could you just, because it was quick for me, but could you refresh my understanding of where that funding allocation came from? We went from, you said 0 to 150 million for the state. Was that part of a federal allocation?
Yeah.
Yes, it's part of the, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's part of the ARPA grants, and it's being pushed down through the Missouri DNR is who is the kind of clearinghouse for the funds.
Mr.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
If I may, I'd like to echo kudos to Dan and to Rick Brown for turning these applications around as quickly. Dan mentioned that it was a quick turnaround, so a number of staff members stepped up to get this done quickly. But I also want to make sure that we recognize the assistance of our legislative consultant, Jake Silverman, who was instrumental in providing guidance to us about this, kept us informed of the timeline and how quickly it was. So again, another instance where Mr. Silverman has served the city quite well in making sure we stayed on task and got that done. So I do want to make sure that he's recognized his part in this process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, is this one of those things where, once we put the applications in, it's kind of hands off, or is that something that Jake can perhaps continue to be the squeaky wheel in the room there to see what we can get done?
We intend to work with Jake to see what he can do. He does have an awful lot of contacts and can work behind the scenes. So we're going to utilize his talents.
Great. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things. Strategically, I want to call out Mr. Brown because when we were going through the cost estimates, we knew that the materials for construction purposes have skyrocketed, and we didn't want to underestimate that. So Mr. Brown, with the assistance of Mr. Ron and Mr. Cross, the decision was made to add a 10% inflation factor to the cost that we had received from Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wagner as part of their task. I also want to note that Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wagner did assist in the preparation of some of those costs. And so again, our consultants were front and center in helping us along the way. And finally, one of the strategic elements that Mr. Brown and I talked, and again, Mr. Cross supported, was we went back to City Council and asked for some matching funds to help our grant application score better. And to Mr. Farmer and Ms. Edens who are here tonight, we thank you for that because it was not something we anticipated, but we knew it would probably help. So thanks again.
Yeah, let's keep this thing rolling. Let's get some, hopefully these will come through and we can actually get to work on some of this stuff. That'll be very exciting. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts on the applications? Okay, moving right along. Anything you want to add on the work program matrix, Joe, or is that just sort of a for information thing in there?
Mr. Chair, I just have 3 quick items and I'll try to do it as I promised, quick. First of all, the Basin Analysis, Mr. Wagner of Wagner and Associates will be handling that for the team of consultants. He is kind of waiting on us to identify those basin areas where he can start investigations. So tomorrow I'll let him know that we're ready to go in West Glen Farms, and if he can get into town and get a jump start on at least one of them, we'll encourage that. Secondly, I talked to Joe Wilson Hydro, and the permits that we are pre-submitting to the Corps of Engineers should be done in early August. And so I've asked for drafts of those so that you all can see what we've been doing, at least in terms of that. And again, remember, those are the critical locations that the grant applications have now been filed with the state. And then finally, at the May meeting of our city council, a decision was made to postpone consideration of the Parks and Stormwater sales tax for an extended period of time as we work through the grant applications. So just to kind of update you on those major things. If there are any questions on any of the updates, Mr. Newberry, Mr. Cross, Mr. Rod, Mr. Brown, and I would be glad to try to answer them. Thank you.
All right. Any questions? Okay. Well, so far this has been a pretty quick meeting, I guess. What else we got here? Any other? Well, we got the basins, so we got the plan. Did you want to talk any about the master plan from the EPA, Joe, or is this just kind of info stuff down here?
We have not prepared anything for tonight's meeting, so no, if we could just skip that, that'd be great.
Cool.
We were trying to get you the highlights of what we've been doing of late, so.
Awesome. Well, I mean, that's a lot of good stuff. And as those of you that were on right before we got kicked off, we still have technically, we'll probably handle this here at the next council meeting. We'll reconfigure the council members, which most likely will just be Ms. Edens and myself, but the work will continue to get done. And hopefully we've got some really exciting stuff coming down the way here. This is maybe we'll actually get to put some shovels in the ground here sooner rather than later. Who knows? All right. So our next meeting is TBD. We're going to kind of play this a little bit by ear. I don't want to necessarily have giant gaps between meetings, but I also know everybody's busy, and so we don't need to hang out if we don't need to. Yes, sir, Mr. Vunich.
Well, my issue is not related to the meeting schedule. So before we close, I just have one other item. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So just keep an eye out on your email. We'll kind of update that as we go. And that's all I got. Carol, did you have anything you wanted to add for closing?
Don't think so.
All right, Mr. Vunich, what you got left?
As part of the letter that was drafted for the property owners' consideration, It was two-sided to save paper, but there is another item on the backside of that, and that's the watershed facts. That would be that postcard. And so sometime between now and hopefully the end of the month, I would ask the task force members to review that and provide any comments as well. I'll send a reminder email tomorrow with it as a separate attachment, but we'd like to start getting that postcard out to at some of our events, particularly at the Celebrate Wildwood event, which is held at the end of September, where we have thousands of people attend, many of which are Wildwood residents. So if you could take a look at that and get back comments on that, I'd appreciate it very much. And as I say, I'll send out an email tomorrow. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess, can we officially take a motion to adjourn, or do I just say we're going to adjourn? Lauren, I saw you waving. I guess you can make an unofficially official motion to adjourn.
I don't think we have to. It was more of a
All right.
more of a wave, but I would defer to Mr. Cross on that. But I don't think it was ever officially called to order, so there's no motion to adjourn. But
All right.
Just say good night, everyone.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you for
Yep.
hopping on, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye all. Thanks.